Close your eyes for a moment, or simply let them grow heavy, and imagine the city of Paris at night. The boulevards are quieting. The last of the café chairs are being stacked. The Seine moves slowly through the city, dark and silver, reflecting the glow of street lamps along its banks. And beneath it all, beneath the cobblestones and the roots of the old chestnut trees, beneath the foundations of buildings that have stood for centuries, a vast underground world hums along in its own patient rhythm, the Paris Metro. More than 300 stations, over 200 kilometers of tunnel. Every day, millions of people descend into this underground city without thinking much about it. They tap their cards, find their platforms, stand in the warm rush of air that arrives just before a train. But tonight, we are going somewhere most of them will never go. Tonight, we are visiting the stations that were built and then forgotten, the ghost platforms, the sealed corridors, the hidden places where the city paused and never quite came back. The story of the Paris Metro begins, as so many grand Parisian stories do, with ambition. By the late 19th century, Paris was a city straining at its own seams. The population had swelled past 2 million. The streets, designed for horses and pedestrians, were choking under the weight of modern life. Something had to be done, and for a generation of engineers and city planners, the answer seemed obvious: go underground. The first line opened on July 19, 1900, just in time for the Paris World's Fair, the great Exposition Universelle that drew over 50 million visitors to the city that summer. The stations wore the sinuous ironwork of Art Nouveau, designed by Hector Guimard, those famous green-crowned entrances that looked less like the mouths of train tunnels and more like the blossoms of some extraordinary plant. They were beautiful, and the people of Paris descended into them with a mixture of wonder and mild apprehension. Over the following decades, the network grew steadily outward, like roots spreading through the soil beneath the city. Engineers planned lines with generous foresight, sometimes constructing stations in places where the surrounding neighborhood had not yet fully formed, trusting that the city would eventually grow to meet them. Sometimes it did, and sometimes it did not.
This is how ghosts are made. Not through drama or catastrophe necessarily, sometimes simply through the slow divergence between what was planned and what came to pass. A neighborhood that grew in a different direction, a war that interrupted everything, a decision made in a government office, quietly, without ceremony, that a certain station would no longer open its doors. The French have a word for these places: station fantôme, phantom stations. There are more than a dozen of them scattered beneath the city, each with its own quiet history. Some were closed during the Second World War and simply never reopened. Others were sealed when the lines were reorganized and rerouted. A few were never opened at all, completed, tiled, and then mothballed, waiting for a future that didn't come.
If you were to ride Line 3 on a certain evening, sitting near the front of the train, watching through the driver's window as the dark tunnel slid past, you might catch a glimpse of something unexpected. A platform, fully formed, its walls tiled in the old style, benches, perhaps, the ghost of a station sign. And then it would be gone, swallowed again by the dark, as the train moved on to places where people still wait and board and travel home. This is Saint-Martin, one of the most visible of Paris's phantom stations. It sits between Republic and Strasbourg-Saint-Denis, a perfectly preserved relic of an earlier city. Opened in 1904, it served passengers faithfully for decades. But as the metro expanded, Saint-Martin found itself too close to its neighbors. Barely a few hundred meters of tunnel separated it from the stations on either side. In 1939,
As the war began and resources contracted, and the city held its breath, Saint Martin was closed. It was supposed to be temporary. It never reopened. What is remarkable is how intact it remains. The walls still carry their original ceramic tiles. The platform still exists, suspended in a kind of perpetual readiness, as though at any moment the trains might stop again, the lights might come on fully, and passengers might descend once more with their briefcases and umbrellas, and the simple, unremarkable business of getting from one place to another. Not far away, another phantom station waits in its own peculiar form of suspension. Champ de Mars opened in 1900, among the very first stations on the very first line. It stood in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, that great iron monument that had itself been built for a World's Fair just 11 years before, and was still regarded by some Parisians with a mixture of pride and vague embarrassment. Champ de Mars served the area for decades, but as the city changed, as the nearby station of Bir Hakeim grew more capable of handling the crowds, Champ de Mars fell quiet. It closed in 1939, and its tunnels were later incorporated into the broader infrastructure of the line. Parts of the platform survive, embedded in the living body of the network, neither fully present nor fully gone. But of all the phantom stations beneath Paris, one is stranger than the rest, and stranger in the most delightful way. Porte de Lilas lies in the northeastern corner of the city, where Line 3 and Line 3 bis separate, and the neighborhood grows quieter and more residential. And within the Porte de Lilas complex, tucked away from the working platforms, is a station that has never served a single ordinary commuter. It was constructed in the 1920s as a testing ground, a place where new trains could be trialed before being released onto the live network. Engineers could test braking systems, acceleration, new designs of carriage, without disrupting the flow of daily service. It was purely functional, purely invisible. But then someone noticed something. The station was beautiful. It had the correct proportions, the correct tiles, the correct feeling of a metro station, and yet it was entirely empty of commuters, entirely free of the complicated logistics of real service. It was, in essence, a stage set that happened to also be a real place. The film industry noticed almost immediately. Since the 1980s, Porte de Lilas Cinéma, as the station is now commonly known, has been used as a filming location for productions that need the look and atmosphere of the Paris Metro, without the inconvenience of shutting down an actual working line. The station changes according to whatever production requires it. Its signs have been altered dozens of times, its decor shifted between eras, its platforms dressed as different stations entirely. Amélie filmed scenes here, Midnight in Paris, countless other films and television productions whose directors wanted the particular quality of golden light that falls on old platform tiles, the specific texture of a city that exists underground. In a sense, this ghost station is more alive than any of the working platforms around it. It is not merely remembered, it is constantly reimagined. There are others too, if you know where to look, or rather, where to listen, and be patient. Arsenal, on Line 8, was closed in 1939 and sealed. Its platform now serves as storage. Croix Rouge, on Line 10, closed during the war and became a kind of subterranean administration post. Saint-Germain-des-Prés, projected and partially excavated in the early 20th century, was never completed, a plan abandoned before it could become reality, leaving only faint traces in the geological record of the city's underground. There is also Haxo, perhaps the most melancholy of them all. Built in the 1920s as part of a line that never opened, Haxo sits in a section of tunnel that carries no regular service. It has never received a single passenger. The platforms were constructed, the walls were tiled, the infrastructure was put in place, and then the line was canceled, and the station has simply existed ever since, in the dark, waiting for trains that will never come. It is, in a strange way, the most perfectly preserved metro station in Paris. Nothing has worn it down. Nothing has changed it. It simply is. There are people in Paris who know these stations intimately. Urban explorers, historians, preservationists, photographers, people drawn to places where ordinary life has paused and something else has taken its place. The Cataphiles, who navigate the vast network of tunnels and quarries beneath the city, sometimes pass through these spaces. Their photographs, when they surface, show platforms still tiled in the style of their original era, architectural details untouched by renovation, the accumulated quiet of decades. The Paris Transport Authority, RATP, occasionally opens select stations for cultural events, a concert on a sealed platform, a historical exhibition in a closed corridor. For a few hours, the ghost stations become inhabited again, filled with music and voices and the soft movement of people who understand they are standing in a kind of living museum. And then the event ends, and the doors close again, and the stations return to their long, patient silence. What is it about these hidden places that speaks to us so quietly? Perhaps it is simply the knowledge that beneath any city,
beneath any life, really. There are layers we cannot see. Structures built with purpose and care, carefully forgotten. Plans that were drawn with great optimism and then quietly set aside. Places that outlasted the reasons for their existence. The phantom stations of Paris remind us that cities are not static things. They grow and contract and reconfigure themselves in ways that leave behind the occasional beautiful remnant, a platform in the dark, a sign with the wrong name on a working train that appears and vanishes in a heartbeat. They remind us, too, that preservation happens in many forms. Some things are kept deliberately, with great expense and intention, and some things are simply kept by accident because no one ever quite got around to demolishing them, and the tunnel is dark, and the trains pass without stopping, and the tiles endure. There is something deeply comforting about that.
And so tonight, if sleep begins to settle around you like the soft air of an underground platform, warm and still and slightly apart from the world above, let your thoughts drift to the cities beneath the cities, to the stations where no one waits, to the platforms that have been tiled and lit and named and forgotten, and are still there, to Haxo in its permanent dark, to Saint Martin with its patient walls, to the little cinema station at Porte de Lilas, dressed tonight as somewhere else entirely, waiting for the cameras to roll. Beneath Paris, the world is quiet. The trains pass, and the ghost stations let them go, and the tiles hold the memory of hands that placed them decades ago, in a city that is still, in all its layers and revisions and beautiful half-forgotten depths, very much alive. Rest now. The city will be there in the morning, and its secrets will keep a little longer.